Hey, book community. So today I was inspired by Jim from Fantasy for the Ages. Just a shout out to him. I was inspired by a video that he put out about the books that has most impacted my life. I think he titled it Books That Changed His Life. I think I'm going to reserve, now this is no reflection on what I think other people should do. I think I'm going to reserve Book That Changed My Life for the Bible. I'm going to reserve it for that. Not that books can't change your life, but just for me personally coming at this video, I think I'm going to reserve that for the Bible. But there are books, there are fantasy books, fiction books, that has definitely left an impact on my life in a very deep and meaningful way. I don't want to talk about those, some of those. These are 6. Now, can I say that there are only 6 that left a deep impact on my life? No, but these had the biggest impact on my life in one way or the other. And I'll try to explain a little bit of how they left an impact on my life as we do the video. But having said that, let's get started. The first book, and this is actually going to be a book that Jim also talked about, but I can't leave it off. It's one of the most impactful books I've ever read, and that is The Last Kingdom by C.S. Lewis. Now, as he said in his video, this is not the best book in the series. This is not my favorite book in the series, but this book left an impact on my life that I'd like to talk about a little bit. As I was reading it, there was much of this book that wasn't resonating with me as I was going throughout the book. I didn't like the direction. I wasn't sure what was going on, but there was a reason for that. I think C.S. Lewis was building up to something. In fact, I would almost, I know we like to call things grimdark, and there are definitely some grimdark books. I felt what I was getting out of the first 75% of this book, I could label as grimdark. It was definitely not a completely different vibe from the other 6 books in the series. And I just wasn't sure I liked the direction. But then I hit the last few chapters, especially the last chapter, the last few pages. What he did in this is, and I don't want to give away any spoilers. I know this has been around for a long, long time. But still, I don't want to give away any spoilers. We come to an ending, and we come to an end of the world of Narnia, which I was sad about. I didn't realize he would actually end the world of Narnia, but he did. And in that, you come to the next chapter, which is the beginning of what we would call heaven. And as he explained this, it was just such a unique and emotionally impactful thing for me as to follow the journey that several characters, especially a particular family, had gone through in all 7 books, and then to find where the next chapter was. And he encouraged them to go further in. And that was a great line, further up and further in. Anyway, I found myself, what kind of impact did this have on me? As I was reading, especially the last 3 pages, I imagine, I was weeping. It took me a long time to get through it because I continuously had to wipe my eyes. I don't weep much or at all when I read books. Sometimes I'll get a little misty-eyed. Sometimes a few tears will trickle down. But I rarely, if ever, weep profusely while I'm reading, but I did with this. And the next few days following finishing this book, every time I would think about the events of this book, especially the end, I would tear up again. So no book has ever impacted me as emotionally as this particular book did, specifically the end. So that is the first book that deeply impacted my life. The second book is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Now, I want to be fair, because if you go back and watch some of my earlier videos, you may find a video where I said I didn't particularly like this book. Well, when I finished this book, I didn't particularly like the book. This is a book that grew on me the more I thought about it. It got better the more I thought about it. Now, it is a bleak book. I read it with several of my friends, and we all agreed it was a bleak book. It was one that was hard to get through. It was uncomfortable, but it follows a man and his son along the road. This is a post-apocalyptic story, and that alone brings up emotions. Where do we go from here? Can we survive? And that's what this entire book was about, is a father trying to help his son survive these ending days, these later days. And with that, I think about my relationship with my children. And though we're not living in a post-apocalyptic world, there are still things that I try to guide my children through, try to teach my children. I hope they can understand what's important in life and things like that, and that loving one another is important and enjoying time together is important and all of that. And it really did leave an impact on my life, especially as a father, the more I thought about it after I finished reading it. In fact, this was one of my favorite books of 2023. Probably, I haven't sat down and kind of rethought through this list, but probably one of my favorite, or close to being top 10, if not in my top 10 of favorite books of all time. But again, that came after I read it. Shout out to another channel, Mike from Mike Book Reads, likes to say that legacy takes time. And it did take some time to really grow on me. But once it grew on me, I absolutely love this book. The next book that I'll talk about is a book that it's not a newer book, it's an older book, but it's one that I had never heard of. But with that, I had watched a movie when I was a child, an animated movie, and the name of it leaves me right now. There were some things in this that reminded me of it, and when I went back and looked it up, the animated cartoon movie was based off of this story. It wasn't exactly the same, but it was based off the story. The book is The Book of the Dun Cow by Walter Wangerin Jr. Now, I think Walter Wangerin Jr., I don't know if I'm pronouncing that last name right, I think he was actually a pastor. And me being a pastor, that brought some connections there. But in this, it's a story of, well, you see this rooster. It's a story of a rooster and several farm animals. And he's kind of the king of his farm. And in this story, he's trying to protect the farm. He's keeping dangers out of the farm. But then there is this looming danger coming, this otherworldly almost danger, this absolute evil coming. And he has to stay, he and the farm, but especially him, has to stand up against this coming and against this evil coming. And with that, there's a lot of loss. There's a lot of loss of a family. There's a lot of loss of friends. There is so much heartache in this book. And that's why this book stands out to me and impacted me so much, is because it is a study. It is looking into how we deal with tragedy, how we deal with loss, how we deal with trouble that comes in our life, and how we grieve over those things as well. And he did it using farm animals. I would have never thought that I would cry over farm animals, not at least in a story context. But this book, if you've never heard of this book, if you've never read this book, I encourage you to pick this up, to find this, because it was such a meaningful book. It's entertaining to a point, then a little depressing with all of the troubles and heartaches that come along in these animals' lives. But then there is so much hope. And that's what I loved. One thing I loved about it is the hope that was born from tragedy and dealing with tragedy. So this is a really good book. Book of the Dun Cow. The next book that I want to talk about is the last book of a series, and that is The Warden and the Wolf King. Now, I want to give a lot away about this because this is an amazing middle grade series, and I would like for people to pick this up and read it, so I don't want to give anything away. But this is from the Wing Feather Saga by Andrew Peterson. This is book 4, the final book of that series. And why or how did this leave an impact on my life? How did this impact me? Well, you kind of have to journey with this particular family to understand fully, because book 1 is very much a traditional fantasy along with middle grade concepts, following 3 children and their family, siblings, and a lot goes on in this that is just small town, farm life, country life, kids just being kids and getting into trouble and doing things like that. Almost a coming of age story. In fact, I do think as this progresses, it's really a coming of age story. But then, as the classical trope is, something bad comes to the village, something bad comes to the town, and they're sent off on a journey. Now, this book is all about life in the town. The next book is where they're sent off on a journey, and then it progresses to this book, the 4th book. Well, in this book, again, just like there are things laid out all throughout the book, in fact, all throughout the series, that made the ending of this book impactful. And the very last of this book, how it concludes, this is just like the Chronicles of Narnia, you know, is Christian-based, Christian allegory, you may say. This is as well, and there is a connection to an important Christian event. There's an important event in Christian history that this points to, and I had no idea that was coming. Other people who read this may have, a lot of people like to read up about a book. I don't read anything about a book before I read it. I try not to listen to many reviews before I read a book because I like to be surprised. Well, I was surprised, and this is a wonderful book. And again, it impacted me emotionally. It also helped me spiritually, and so that was a wonderful thing to experience about this book. My second to last book, the penultimate book in this video, is a book from a series that meant a lot to me. Unexpectedly, I think I would say. There is a booktuber on, well, BookTube, that I began to listen to and watch, and I enjoyed his video. First, before I found his channel, I found him on other people's channel doing interviews and things like that, discussions. And then I found out, well, he was writing a series. And so when he wrote a series, I picked up the first book in that series, and it was The Way of Edan by Philip Chase. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much. So much that I did a book review on this channel. I talked about it. And then after that, Philip reached out to me and asked me if I would like an arc of the second book. And so I did, and I read it, and it was fantastic fantasy. It was everything you want in a fantasy book, all the way up until the end. But the ending was strange. The ending of book 2, this is a planned trilogy, the ending of book 2, everything seems to be resolved up until the very ending where it sets up for the next book. But everything seems to be resolved. The big enemy is defeated, and everything seems to be okay. The good guys won. And you almost wonder, well, what is going to happen from here? How is this going to change? What's going to happen? And then you read the very end, and you understand it's setting up. I wasn't ready for what this book does. The return to Edan impacted me so much in my life. It emotionally helped me as a person, I would say. I'm not going to say maybe all the conclusions that the author has on everything I fully line up with. We don't line up with everything that everybody has. That's what makes us unique individuals. But just the general feel of this book, looking at humanity, is there anything good about humanity? Is there anything redeemable about humanity? Is there anything that humanity can offer except pain and evil? And he talks about that in this book. I don't want to give anything away if you haven't picked the series up, because I want you to pick the series up. And so this impacted me personally, because it kind of changes the way you view people around you and the way you want to treat people, and asking all the same questions that I've already talked about. So I really appreciated Philip for writing this book. There's also beautiful, I love beautiful prose. I love beautiful writing. There are books that other people have not liked that I have liked because the writing was just beautiful. And there are books that people have loved that I didn't love as much because the prose were not as elevated. And the prose in this whole trilogy, and especially in this book, and some of the scenes, is just, it brings you into the story. There's a scene in the first book, The Way of Edan, of a ship's coming into to an island, and you jump from the perspective of the people on the ship to the perspective of a bird in the air flying out over the city, and he describes the city, describes the island, describes the city through the eyes of the bird. And that was one of the first most beautiful visual moments that I had in the book. This particular book has a scene where people around a campfire, and someone begins to play music and someone begins to sing a song, and just, you are swept away in this song. You're swept away in the scene, and your view may even change a little bit about some of the people around the campfire. And it was such a beautiful moment. Impacted me in such a great way. You can kind of see this book, and if you listen to my channel or read any of my social media posts. Before long, you'll find out that I love this, and it is The Lord of the Rings. All three books. I would include The Hobbit with it as well. I view that as one story, really. I know it's separate, but it's all in the same world. And this particular book, The Lord of the Rings, this has left an impact on my life, for one thing, because of my father. It was his favorite story. It was his favorite book. And he wanted me to be a reader so bad while he was alive. He's passed away back in 2007. He wanted me to be a reader, and I just wasn't interested. Wasn't for me. I watched the movies back in the early 2000s, 99, 2000, 2001, in that time, and I loved the story. I didn't have a problem with the story, but I didn't want to sit down and read a book. In fact, what made me become a reader like I am today was just a few years ago when I said, you know what, my dad loved this book. Maybe I need to, in honor of his memory, I'm not going to enjoy this. I probably won't even finish it, but I'm going to start reading The Lord of the Rings. And I did. And I read the book, I remember it was the month of September it was August when I read it. And I also read another couple of books that month, because this set me on a journey of wanting to read more. In fact, this channel really was birthed because of love for this book. And I've been reading it every year since, rereading it. And this book is my favorite book of all time. It's my favorite author of all time. I kind of have a designation now when I talk about my favorite authors, or authors who are becoming my favorite, and are really meaning a lot to me. I say my favorite living author because I don't know that anybody will ever take the place of Tolkien in my life. I don't know that any story will ever take the place of this story, but not because there may not be better stories written. I'm not going to say that. Who am I to make that critique that stories can't get better? But I don't think anything is going to be able to impact me in the way this book has, because of my father. And there is just a connection there, and it will always be there. And I'm thankful for this story. I'm thankful for this author. In fact, I'm thankful for all of these stories and all of these authors. But what about you? Are there books that have impacted you in an emotional way, in a powerful way, maybe changed you as a person? Maybe you think differently on things. Maybe you live differently on things in ways because of something you read in a book. Tell me about it. Let me know what books have left such a meaningful impact on your life. Thank you for watching. Go read books.